In this movie, we'll take a look at how you can combine strokes along with colored fills when tracing artwork inside Illustrator. So here we are looking at a vector take on Albrecht Dürer's classic 16th century rhinoceros, which might be better than the last illustration we looked at. And so let's see how we can put something like this together. I'm going to create a new document just by pressing Control-N or Command-N on the Mac. And I'll once again set the profile to basic RGB. This time a horizontal orientation is going to work great, at which point I'll click OK in order to create that document. Then I'll go up to the File menu and choose the Place command. Again, we have a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on the Mac. And I've got this image here called Grayscale Rhino TIFF that I'll just go ahead and double-click in order to load my cursor, and then I'll click, being careful not to drag, inside the document window. All right, now I want to scale the artboard to fit the image. So I'll select the artboard tool, which I can get by pressing Shift-O, and I'll go ahead and drag the corners until they snap into position with the help of Smart Guides, after which point I'll press the Escape key in order to exit the artboard mode. And I'll go to the Layers panel, click on the flyout menu icon, choose Panel Options. I just can't stand small thumbnails, so I'll select Other and change the size to 70 pixels, and then I'll just go ahead and rename this layer Tracings and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. Now, at this point, the image is looking pretty terrible, and that's because we're so far zoomed out from it. But if you zoom in to 300% or more, it'll start looking a lot better. All right, now I'll click the Image Trace button and ignore the warning by clicking OK in order to give Illustrator a chance to take a first swing at things. And then I'll click on the Image Trace panel icon to bring up said panel. All right, now I happen to know some settings I want to apply here, so I'm going to twirl open the Advanced area, and I'm going to turn off the preview for a moment while I adjust some settings. I know I want to switch the mode from black and white to grayscale so that we can trace various shades of gray, at which point Illustrator asks you how many grays you'd like. I'm just going to leave it set to 50, but you can adjust that value to taste. I'm going to take the number of paths up to 100%. I'm going to take the corners value down to 50%, and I'll take the noise value down to just 1. Then I'll turn on the Ignore White checkbox, and I'll turn off Snap Curves to Lines. And finally, I'll click on the Trace button to see what Illustrator comes up with. And bear in mind, this time it's going to create more path outlines, but they're going to be various shades of gray this time around. So obviously, we have a more complex tracing than we've seen in the past. And in my case, my screen is turning black, but once it finishes, we can see these wonderful shades of gray that Illustrator has come up with. All right, now let's add some strokes on top of them by first getting the Image Trace panel out of the way of the Layers panel, and then I'll twirl open that panel and grab this guy right there and Alt or Option drag him up ever so slightly to create a duplicate. Then you want to make sure that that top tracing is selected, turn off the Preview checkbox once again, switch the mode back to black and white, because notice that the fills and strokes checkboxes are dimmed when we're working in either color or grayscale. So go ahead and switch back to black and white. I'm going to set the threshold this time to 150. The other values are fine as is, except for the fact that I'm going to turn off fills, which automatically turns on strokes, and I'm going to change the stroke value right there to 20 pixels, after which point I'll go ahead and click the Trace button once again in order to apply my settings. Now, it's going to look terrible at first, and that's because you can't adjust the line weight until you expand the strokes. So what we're going to do is select this entire layer and then bring up the Layers panel flyout menu and choose Duplicate Tracings in order to duplicate that layer. Now what you want to do is scroll down here and turn off the top tracing in this blue tracing layer, and then just go ahead and twirl this layer closed. And double-click on an empty portion of the top layer, the one we just duplicated, and let's change it to Expanded and change the color to light red, just so we can tell it apart. All right, now with this big stroked object selected, click on the Expand button up here in the Control panel, and then let's take the line weight value down to just 0.3 points in order to produce these much more delicate lines here. All right, now I want to colorize the grays a little bit. So I'm going to hide the Image Trace panel, and I'm going to select this lower object right here. And notice it's appearing blue. That's just because you have to collapse and expand this layer once again for it to turn red. And so with it selected, go ahead and click on the Expand button once again in order to expand the traced object to static path outlines. All right, now I want to go ahead and fuse all these objects together. And this is a kind of preview of coming attractions in the very next chapter. What I want you to do is go up to the Window menu and choose Pathfinder to bring up the Pathfinder panel. And then just go ahead and click on this very first icon in the first row. And what it does is it goes ahead and unites all of these various path outlines into one overarching outline, which is just going to make things a little simpler in the long run. And as you can see, you're going to get a progress bar because we are creating a fairly extraordinarily complicated document here. So try to be patient with Illustrator as it does its best. Then I'll go ahead and hide the Pathfinder panel, and I'll click on the fill icon up here in the control panel, and I'll change it to this medium shade of blue, which is R0 G113 B188. And then finally, I'll click on the word opacity, once again up here in the control panel, and I'm going to change the blend mode, which is a topic that we'll be looking at in a future chapter of this very course. And I'm going to change the mode to color so that we're colorizing the rhinoceros in the background. And then I'm going to take the opacity value down to 50% and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to hide that panel. And finally, I'll go ahead and press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac in order to deselect that artwork. And I will press the F key a couple of times to switch to the full screen mode. And I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to fit the artwork on screen. And that, folks, is at least one way to combine strokes along with colored fills when auto-tracing a piece of classic artwork here inside Illustrator.